I'd like to spend a few moments to outline the design and construction process, but before I do, I'd like to start with a few quotes. The first is a quote by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's great detective Sherlock Holmes. "It's a capital mistake to theorise before one has data." It's in this context that it's important to recognise that design is itself theoretical, and that really we need robust data in order to support design decisions. As Stuart Brand, author of How Buildings Learn, wrote, "All designs are predictions, or predictions are wrong." And it's with this in mind that we should also consider Winston Churchill's quote, "We shape the buildings, and then the buildings shape us." Getting the appropriate design is fundamental. Not only do you need the appropriate framework, but you also need to know how to get the most out of that framework. And it's in this respect that the RIBA plan of work provides a useful starting point. What you see being laid out in front of you now is a model of the RIBA plan of work. They're being arranged along a horizontal axis that represents the time that it takes to complete a project. The plan of work has got 8 stages: strategic brief, preparation and strategic definition, preparation and brief, concept design, develop design, technical design, construction, handover and closeout, and in use. Clients tend to approach an architect when they believe that they're moving into the concept design phase. In my experience, clients still tend to be in the preparation and brief phase, or even in the strategic definition phase of a project. There's a tendency for clients to race to complete and for architects to hurry to commence with a design. During the course of this short video, you'll learn how these approaches can compromise a project. During the typical project, there are a number of different key milestones. These are critical points where fundamental communication must be made in order to between one stakeholder and another. It may be between you and your architect, it may be between the design team and a local authority, or it may be between some other party such as a building contractor. Key milestones include, but are not limited to, the needs and options review, the planning application, building regulations application, the point where you are seeking costs and then appointing a building contractor, practical completion, which is the stage at which the building is practically complete in the view of the contract, and then there is completion, which takes place 12 months later after the defects liability period. On the left, on the vertical axis, I'm going to be using this as a way of describing the amount of effort that is expended over time. Clients hire architects with the purpose of designing buildings. They tend to believe that the process of documenting the design is, from the beginning through to completion, is an automatic process. Nothing could be further from the truth. Did you know that about 25% of an architect's time is spent drawing up the design? The rest of the time is spent using their design, management and communication skills to control upfront costs and risks on their client's behalf. Throughout the various stages of the project, architects manage the interfaces between a variety of social, cultural, legal and environmental constraints. They also manage the interface between various stakeholders and also those physical interfaces between an array of materials, technologies and products. In front of you, you can see a representation of the amount of time and effort that architects traditionally commit to a project. At the initial phase, there's a moderate level of effort required. This then significantly increases to a peak during the technical design phase, and then reduces down during the construction and handover phases, and then terminates fairly abruptly. The blue line indicates the opportunity for change. You can see how the greatest opportunity exists at the beginning of a project, and it quickly diminishes as the project progresses. So it's with this in mind that I think a couple of quotes might be relevant. The first is from the National Audit Office. It says he says that the design represents a minute proportion of the lifetime costs of a building, less than 1%. But done well, it has a disproportionate impact upon how well the building and its surroundings perform. The other quote is from Dr. Joseph Rom, who was acting Assistant Secretary at the US Department of Energy Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. And he said, although building and design costs represent only a fraction of the building's life cycle costs, when just 1% of a project's upfront costs are spent, up to 70% of the life cycle cost may already be committed. So this is, these kind of things are quite relevant and pretty important. If we then move on and we think about this red line, the red line indicates the cost of making changes. Before employing any consultants, changes can be made for relatively little money. Then, as the project progresses and the volume of documentation increases and other expenditure has been made, the cost of making changes increases, in some cases quite radically, on an exponential basis. Once the technical design phase is complete, then the cost of making changes increases radically because of all the documentation that has to be completed, and because of there's also the risk of needing to make changes to things that have already been constructed on site. If the design has not been completely resolved by the time the technical design phase is complete, then there is a great risk that financial difficulties, as like many aspects of the design may remain unexplored. Traditional design approaches mean that by the time you reach the red dot, you have got a very limited opportunity to make changes for relatively low cost, and furthermore, should any issues start to arise and the project be found to be over budget, then there's a very limited amount of work that can be done to bring the project back on track. Should the project be found at this late stage to be over budget, then all that can be done is to strip back on the quality of the materials and the finishes and undermine the quality of the finished design. This means that you don't achieve everything that you set out to achieve. Later, once you've started on site, variations and omissions require costly change orders, and architect's instructions have to be used in an attempt to get the project back on track. With changing regulations and increased client expectations, homes are becoming increasingly complex and more difficult to manage. Traditional design approaches have ceased to work effectively. And it's with that in mind that I'm also reminded of a quote by Abraham Lincoln, who said, "If I had 9 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 6 sharpening my axe." Preparation is a prerequisite with all successful design. So you can make effective changes at this very early stage at the beginning of a project, but you can't make effective changes later in the project, namely at the end of the technical design phase, and certainly not at later stages in the project. What is needed is a design methodology that creates the greatest opportunity for you to test ideas and concepts, to interrogate the brief, and to understand your requirements and the things that will shape and inform your design. What you see here is a representation of an integrated design methodology. This focuses more time and effort at the earlier stages of a project. It explores the options thoroughly and develops a robust understanding of the design before the design can be locked down. The shape and form of the building will be explored, its impact upon the design will be examined. The space planning and its suitability for your lifestyle needs will also be considered. The character of materials, the style of the architecture can also be reviewed. all prior to committing to a specific design solution. You can then proceed in confidence. Integrated design requires more time and effort to be expended up front, so that you can increase certainty, reduce risk, and get more out of the home that matches your needs, your budget, and your time frame. Learn how to complete your project on time and on budget by watching the video below. Thank you for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed this short training video.